Carl Jung spent decades studying this kind of love. He called it a rare psychological phenomenon found in less than 10% of people, those with what he described as a differentiated soul. Most people fall in love to fill something, an emptiness, a loneliness, a missing piece they believe another person can complete. They love because they need to. They love to feel safe, to be seen, to escape themselves. But you loved knowing it would hurt. You loved someone not because it was easy or logical, but because something in you recognized something in them. A recognition so deep it bypassed reason and burned straight into your soul. That isn't foolishness. That's evolution. Carl Jung called this the beginning of transcendent love. The moment when love rises above the ego's hunger and becomes an act of spiritual seeing. It's when love stops being about what you get and starts being about what you honor. You didn't love to possess them. You loved to witness them, to stand in awe of their essence, even if you could never hold it. That kind of love, Jung said, is one of the rarest forms of consciousness a human being can reach, because it's not driven by need, it's driven by recognition. Recognition of something eternal within another person, something luminous and familiar. You saw their depth, their beauty, their pain, and somehow it reflected your own. That's why you couldn't forget them. Not because you were obsessed, but because your soul was saying, "There I am." You weren't just in love with them. You were in love with the part of you that awakened when you saw them. When Jung wrote about love in its highest form, he described it as the union of opposites, the dance between two beings who mirror the divine within one another. Most people never reach this stage. They stay in the shallow waters of attachment, mistaking validation for intimacy, control for connection. But you dove deeper. You didn't choose convenience. You chose truth. You didn't seek comfort. You sought clarity. This kind of love isn't romantic in the usual sense. It doesn't belong to fairy tales or happy endings. It belongs to the soul's evolution, the way fire belongs to transformation. Because through that love, you touched something sacred, something so vast that even losing it left you larger than before. And though the world might see it as heartbreak, Jung would have called it initiation, a breaking open of the self so that the light inside could expand. That's why this love stays with you, because it wasn't about them, it was about your becoming. It was the soul saying, "Here is what you are capable of. Here is how deeply you can feel. Here is what it means to love beyond fear, to love this way, without needing to own, without demanding to be loved back, is not to be naive. It is to touch the divine nature of love itself, and once you've touched that, you can never return to ordinary affection. You've crossed the threshold Jung described, where love is no longer a transaction between egos, but a conversation between souls. You have loved beyond the ego, and in doing so, you've discovered what only a few ever do, that love isn't something you find in another person, it's something you become. Sometimes love doesn't begin with attraction. It begins with recognition. A sudden, unexplainable knowing that this person, this stranger, carries something you've been searching for all your life. Not in your mind, not even in your heart, but in your soul. Carl Jung called this phenomenon anima and animus recognition. It's the moment when the inner masculine and feminine within you, the hidden energies that shape your psyche, meet their reflection in another human being. And for one breathtaking instant, you feel whole. That's why you couldn't explain it. Why the connection felt ancient, fated, like you had met before time itself began. Why it felt both magnetic and impossible. You weren't imagining it. Your psyche was in conversation with itself. That person was not just another lover. They were an archetype, a living symbol of what your unconscious wanted you to see. They carried the qualities your soul had buried or forgotten. Their confidence awakened your courage. Their freedom stirred your longing for expression. Their stillness reminded you of the peace you had denied yourself for years. Jung believed that these encounters are never coincidences. They're psychological summons, invitations from the self, the deeper intelligence within you, to evolve. The love wasn't random. It was destiny disguised as desire. When Jung spoke of the anima and animus, he described them as the inner images of the opposite gender that live within us all. The anima, the inner feminine, carries intuition, empathy, creativity, and feeling. The animus, the inner masculine, embodies reason, courage, structure, and will. When one of these is undeveloped in us, life has a way of bringing someone who embodies it, so that we can reclaim it within ourselves. That's why you couldn't stop thinking about them. It wasn't obsession, it was activation. They awakened something you hadn't yet lived, something that had been waiting in the depths of your unconscious to come alive. This is why such love feels cosmic. You sense that something larger than two people is at work, something ancient, archetypal, moving through you both. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." That's exactly what happened. This person entered your life, and suddenly your inner world rearranged itself. You began to question who you were and who you could become. Your dreams shifted. Your desires deepened. You started feeling the pull to grow into someone bigger than your past self. That's not heartbreak. That's initiation. When your soul recognizes itself in another, it doesn't mean you're meant to be with them. It means you're meant to become the version of yourself that this recognition revealed. They weren't just the one that got away. They were the one that awakened you. They came to show you your reflection. Not to stay, but to remind you of who you're meant to be. And though it may have felt like loss, Jung would tell you it was never about losing them. It was about finding you. Because sometimes, the person you can't have is the mirror your soul sent to remind you of everything you already are. There are loves that feel ordinary, explainable by timing, chemistry, or circumstance. And then there are the others, the ones that feel like myth, larger than life, charged with meaning, alive with destiny. Carl Jung called these encounters archetypal attractions, moments when two people meet under forces far greater than chance. They don't follow logic. They follow pattern. They feel fated because, in a way, they are. You didn't just meet that person by coincidence. Your unconscious was calling them into your life, summoning the exact energy your soul needed for its next stage of evolution. That's why you couldn't forget them, why they occupied your thoughts long after it was over, or even if it never began. It wasn't just emotional attachment. It was symbolic significance. They represented something your psyche was trying to awaken. Jung observed that when we fall in love with someone unattainable, someone who remains just beyond reach, it's often not that person we're chasing, but the part of ourselves they represent. This is why their absence still lingers. The story between you didn't end. It simply moved inward. It continues to unfold within you as your consciousness integrates the lessons they came to deliver. Jung believed the unconscious communicates through symbols and encounters, and sometimes a person becomes the most powerful symbol of all. They arrive not to complete you, but to reveal you, to mirror the archetype you're meant to embody. Perhaps they embodied freedom, and your soul was asking for liberation. Perhaps they carried confidence, and your inner self longed for courage. Perhaps they radiated calm, and your spirit was craving peace. Whatever it was, their presence acted like a key, unlocking a chamber within you that had long been sealed. You see, Archetypal attractions aren't really about two people falling in love. They're about the psyche seeking wholeness. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. And sometimes, the only way the soul can get your attention is through a love so powerful, it shakes your sense of self. When you met them, something ancient stirred inside you, something beyond this lifetime, beyond personal history. That feeling of déjà vu, that instant knowing, that sense that time stopped for a moment. It wasn't fantasy. It was the self, the divine center of your being, trying to say, wake up. Remember who you are. That's why no amount of reasoning could dissolve the connection. Because it wasn't logical, it was archetypal. It lived in the realm of the soul, not the mind. These relationships are rarely meant to last in the physical world. They burn too brightly, move too deeply, stretch you too far. Their purpose isn't to give you permanence, it's to give you perspective. Jung wrote that such encounters are like divine accidents, designed by the unconscious to guide us toward the deepest truths of ourselves. That person's role was never to complete you. It was to call you home. Home to your depth. Home to your purpose. Home to the parts of you that had been waiting patiently for the right soul to awaken them. They were not your ending. They were your beginning. After an impossible love, most people rush to forget. They distract themselves, bury the ache, pretend it never mattered. But you couldn't. Not because you're weak, but because you feel more deeply than most ever will. You don't skim the surface of connection. You dive. You don't just love. You experience love as a spiritual event, something that rearranges your entire being. Carl Jung called people like this old souls in modern skins. You carry an ancient kind of sensitivity, the capacity to feel paradox, to hold contradiction, to search for meaning even in heartbreak. You're not built for casual connection. You're built for depth. While others chase comfort, you chase truth. While others avoid pain, you seek understanding. You'd rather be broken open by something real than numbed by something shallow. And that's exactly why this kind of love shattered you, not to destroy you, but to expand you, to stretch your emotional capacity until it could contain the infinite. Jung once wrote that, "Only that which wounds us can truly transform us." You've lived that. You've learned that love isn't meant to stay neat or predictable, it's meant to reveal. That impossible love became your initiation into emotional depth, because it forced you to meet yourself, the raw, unguarded, unedited self that exists beneath identity and expectation. You learned to sit in silence with feelings that had no name, to hold grief and gratitude in the same breath, to love someone fiercely, even in their absence. That's not fragility. That's mastery. You discovered that love doesn't end when it's unreturned. It transforms. It refines you. It makes your heart a vessel large enough to hold both beauty and loss. This is the paradox of the deep soul. You break more easily, but you heal more completely. Because every experience, even heartbreak, becomes material for growth. While others measure love by how long it lasts, you measure it by how much it reveals, by how profoundly it teaches you about yourself, about life, about the divine mystery of being human. Most people fear emotional depth because it feels like drowning. But you've learned to breathe underwater. You've discovered that beneath the pain lies clarity, beneath the longing lies wisdom, beneath the sorrow lies strength. That's why you can't simply move on, because you're not meant to. You're meant to integrate, to carry forward what that love showed you, the tenderness, the awareness, the courage to stay open even when it hurts. And maybe now you realize love was never supposed to make life easier. It was supposed to make life truer. It's not about finding someone who makes you forget your wounds. It's about finding someone who helps you see through them. You loved someone impossible, and in doing so, you learned that the real miracle isn't being loved back. It's being able to love at all, so deeply, so selflessly, that even loss becomes a teacher. You possess emotional depth few understand, and though it may isolate you at times, it also makes you luminous, because the heart that has broken and stayed open is the heart through which the light enters the world. Carl Jung discovered something extraordinary about those who love impossibly. He found that many of them carry one of the most powerful forces in the human psyche, the wounded healer archetype. It means you are the kind of soul who heals others through what you've survived. Your empathy was not learned, it was forged. Your compassion was not gifted, it was earned. That impossible love didn't just break your heart, it initiated it. It burned away illusion, pride, and fantasy, leaving behind something more sacred, authenticity. Jung believed that the wounded healer embodies a paradox. They are both scarred and luminous. Their light shines because of the cracks, not despite them. You loved beyond reason, beyond ego, beyond what was safe. And though it hurt, that love purified your perception. You began to see people, not as roles or promises, but as souls, each carrying invisible battles. That's why you understand others in a way most people can't. You feel their wounds before they speak. You sense what they're hiding, not because you're intrusive, but because you've been there. You've walked through the fire of longing and loss, and it left you fluent in the language of pain. You no longer turn away from suffering. You can sit with someone in silence and let them be seen. You've learned that true healing doesn't come from fixing. It comes from presence. From the courage to sit beside another human being in their darkness without flinching. That calmness you feel now when others crumble, that unshakable steadiness that surprises even you, that's wisdom. It's what Jung described as the light that only shines through brokenness. You carry that light now. It's quiet, but powerful. It doesn't demand attention, but people feel safer around you. They sense that you've been to the edge of despair and returned with something holy. The wounded healer doesn't preach. They embody. They lead not through certainty, but through understanding. Not through answers, but through compassion. And perhaps you've noticed, the people drawn to you are often those in pain. They see in you what they can't yet see in themselves. Proof that survival is possible. That healing doesn't mean forgetting, but transforming. Your impossible love was never punishment. It was apprenticeship. It taught you the anatomy of the heart, how it breaks, how it bleeds, how it mends, and how it expands. And in that process, you became a kind of alchemist, turning sorrow into wisdom, longing into clarity, pain into empathy. Your wound became your mirror. Every scar reflects a lesson learned, every ache a doorway to deeper awareness. Jung believed that the greatest healers are those who have known great pain, because only they can guide others through it with truth, not theory. You loved someone you couldn't have, and in losing them, you found something priceless, the ability to love without condition, to see without judgment, to hold space without fear. That is the legacy of the wounded healer. Your love became your medicine. And now, simply by being who you are, you offer that medicine to the world. Carl Jung believed that the highest form of love is recognition without possession. To love someone purely for who they are, not for what they give you. Most people love to fill an emptiness within themselves. They chase affection to feel whole, validation to feel worthy, attachment to feel safe. But when you've loved someone you couldn't have, and still chose to love them anyway. You've touched something far rarer. You've touched what Jung called individuated love, love that arises not from need, but from wholeness. This kind of love doesn't cling, it doesn't beg, it doesn't bargain, it doesn't demand titles or certainty. It simply recognizes. It says, I see you, I honor you, even if I can't have you. That's not resignation, that's transcendence. It means your love has matured beyond the ego's hunger for control or ownership. It's no longer about filling the void. It's about expressing the fullness of your being. You've discovered that real love is not about possession. It's about presence. It's about holding space for someone to be entirely themselves, without needing them to play a role in your story. Jung wrote that, where love reigns, there is no will to power. In other words, true love cannot coexist with the need to dominate, define, or contain. It's a spiritual experience, not an exchange. When you loved someone freely, without asking for guarantees, without needing to change them or make them stay, you weren't being naive. You were practicing one of the rarest forms of psychological evolution. You were loving as the self loves, the deep, divine center of your psyche that recognizes beauty as its own reflection. To love this way requires courage, the courage to feel everything without closing your heart, to care deeply while knowing you may never be chosen, to let go with grace rather than resentment. And yet, you did. You loved fully, without needing ownership to validate the experience. That is emotional mastery, because love like this doesn't end when circumstances do. It lives on quietly, not as obsession, but as reverence. You can look at that person now and feel gratitude instead of bitterness, peace instead of longing. You understand that their role in your life wasn't to stay. It was to awaken, to mirror the love already alive within you. And now, that love has become your own, not something you give away to be returned, but something you are. You've learned that relationships may fade, but love, when purified of attachment, becomes eternal. It transforms from I need you to I bless you, from be mine to be free. That is what Jung meant by the alchemy of individuation, when the soul transcends the ego's limitations and begins to love as consciousness itself. You no longer chase completion through another person. You've realized that loving someone and letting them go can exist in the same heart, at the same time, without contradiction. That is not loss. That is liberation. Because the truth is, you didn't lose them. You found yourself. And that is what it means to love without needing to own. But Carl Jung also offered a warning. This kind of love, as beautiful as it is, carries a shadow. When we encounter a soul who feels larger than life, someone who awakens the deepest parts of us, it's easy to mistake the archetype for the actual person. We stop seeing them as human and start seeing them as divine. Jung called this romantic inflation. When love becomes so exalted, it blinds us to reality. We project godlike qualities onto another person, believing they hold the key to our wholeness, when in truth, they were only ever holding up a mirror. This is the dangerous beauty of archetypal love. It feels sacred, because it is. But it's sacred for what it reveals in you, not for who the other person is supposed to become. The test, Jung said, is not to cling to the symbol, but to integrate the experience. Not to chase the fantasy, but to extract the lesson. Because when love turns into worship, it ceases to free you and starts to bind you. You build a temple around the memory and call it devotion, but sometimes that temple becomes a prison. So ask yourself honestly, did this love expand you, or freeze you in longing? Did it open your soul, or become a hiding place from the ordinary life you're meant to live? If it expanded you, It was divine. It showed you the magnitude of what your heart can hold. It connected you to something timeless. But if it trapped you, if it made you idealize what could never be, then it's asking to be transformed. Jung taught that the energy of love must keep flowing, or it turns toxic. What was once sacred begins to stagnate. What once awakened you begins to numb you. You cannot stay forever at the altar of the unattainable. You must bring that love down to earth, into your art, your purpose, your compassion, your presence. Let it live through you, not instead of you. Because the point is not to forget them. The point is to reclaim the part of you they awakened. They were never meant to complete you. They were meant to ignite you. The truth is, that person was a doorway, not a destination. They opened a portal to your own depths, and then life, in its wisdom, closed it so you could walk forward carrying what you found inside. That is the integration Jung spoke of, to retrieve the energy of that impossible love and make it your own. To stop worshipping the symbol and start embodying the light it showed you. That's how romantic inflation becomes revelation. That's how fantasy becomes fuel. And that's how love, even the impossible kind, becomes evolution. So if you've ever loved someone you couldn't be with, don't call it failure. Call it initiation. You've touched the highest frequency of the human heart, the kind of love that doesn't demand ownership, only understanding. You've experienced what Jung called transcendent love, love that rises beyond desire, beyond ego, beyond outcome. Jung once wrote, "The meeting with the self is the meeting with one's destiny." That love, the one that broke you, awakened you, and never quite left you, was your destiny's doorway. Even though they're gone, you're not empty. You're illuminated. Because now you know, real love doesn't end when it's impossible. It begins when it becomes unconditional. You've stepped into the rarest human experience. To love not for possession, but for evolution. And that means you've passed through the soul's quiet initiation and emerged more whole than before. Subscribe for more Jungian psychology, shadow work, and soul alchemy insights. And remember, you didn't lose them. You found yourself.